Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on the Early Development Instrument Project at Erikson Institute. My name is Jacqueline Vasquez, and I'm the director of the EDI.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Halprin, and I'm the knowledge manager on the EDI.
Together, we will be sharing an overview of our work and really how the EDI is a part of the Policy and Leadership Department at Erikson Institute, as well as answering some of our frequently asked questions. If at the end of our webinar you still have additional questions or would like to connect to extend the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Our information will be at the end, and it's also found on our website. So our policy agenda really does three things. We aim to expand our influence, increase our impact, and contribute to positive outcomes for young children, families, and communities. And we do that through these three buckets of work. We have the Early Childhood Leadership Academy. We also refer to that as ECLA. We have the Barbara Bowman Leadership Fellows and the McCormick Foundation Executive Fellows. We also have our public policy and advocacy bucket here, where we aim to strengthen the workforce pipeline, improve the social determinants of health, as well as securing family supports, and our community data lab. We have the Illinois Risk and Reach Project. The Early Development Instrument is situated in this bucket, as well as a Chicago risk factor analysis. And we do this through democratizing data, igniting action, and building capacity for those around us. Now, a little bit more, let's go right into the Early Development Instrument. I have a really quick clip here for you. It's about 4 minutes, and this gives you the overview of what the instrument is itself. So fingers crossed with technology. Let's see if this works.
A child's early years of life are incredibly important. What happens during the first 5 years has lifelong effects. That's because the brain develops rapidly during these years and changes based on a child's experiences. If children receive good quality stimulation, support, and nurturance during these years, the brain will develop in healthy ways, giving children a strong foundation for future success. Sadly, not all children have positive experiences during these crucial years and lack the stimulation, support, and nurturance needed for the brain to develop in the healthiest way possible. That means there are more challenges for these children as they grow. Many later problems, including school failure, antisocial behavior, teen pregnancy, obesity, high blood pressure, depression, coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, premature aging, and memory loss, can be traced back to early childhood. But if we help children and families early on, we can avoid many of these negative outcomes thanks to the brain's ability to easily change and adapt at this stage, something that becomes much harder as we age. Investing resources during this unique window of opportunity provides the best return on investment, with governments receiving between $4 and $8 back in benefits for every $1 spent on early childhood programs. That is why knowing how our young children are doing is so vital for their future well-being. If we don't know how children are doing, we can't identify any problems, we can't effectively help them, and we won't know if things are getting better or worse. To stay informed about children's early development, communities across Canada and around the world are using the Early Development Instrument, or EDI for short. The EDI is a teacher-completed questionnaire developed by Drs. Dan Offord and Magdalena Janis at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. The EDI measures kindergarten children's ability to meet age-appropriate and developmental expectations across 5 general areas: physical health and well-being, emotional maturity, social competence, language and cognitive development, and communication skills and general knowledge. Teachers are best suited to complete the EDI because they know the range of appropriate child behaviors and skills within a school setting. And by the time they complete the EDI in the second half of the school year, they have had plenty of opportunity to see how each child learns, plays, and interacts with other children. After teachers complete the EDI on each individual child in their class, the results are grouped together to give a snapshot of how children are doing across schools, neighborhoods, cities, or even provinces and countries. Children who fall below the standardized EDI cutoff scores are referred to as vulnerable. Research shows that these children are more likely to experience poorer outcomes later in life, academically, emotionally, and in their relationships with peers. Focusing on strengthening the areas in which children are vulnerable allows schools, communities, and governments to make decisions on how to best support early development. Schools may be good at recognizing individual children who struggle, but without knowing the major areas of strength and weakness in the school and community, there can be no action to help all children. Most of the children vulnerable on the EDI do not have any health problems and will not be helped through any other means. Without knowing how all children are developing, schools and communities are left guessing. This is what makes EDI data so important. In many places, collecting EDI data is the first step toward mobilizing communities and engaging those who aren't usually involved in promoting the development of young children. By getting a glimpse of the development and well-being of young children through the EDI, people can be inspired to do something to improve the lives of our young children and help shape a better future in their own communities and beyond.
And that video clip can be found on our website and on YouTube as well.
So just as a recap from the video, I just want to reiterate these main points. So the EDI is a population or a large group measure. The EDI can and is often used as a community needs assessment, and it's designed to have a population focus that can complement other existing local tools that might have a more individualized focus. In Australia, they actually refer to it as a kindergarten census because it's done across the entire country. And it looks at 5 developmental domains, which we'll see on the next slides, that are very holistic and thinking about the whole child. It's an actual survey of 103 questions that is presented back in the form of maps and tables. And it's done by the kindergarten teachers about halfway through the school year, so they have time to really know those students. And it's done every 3 years because it's rooted in community systems development, and change takes time in that field to see things really move. And it offers this precise data that multiple stakeholders can use. So what are those 5 developmental domains? So we've got physical health and well-being, and that looks at things like motor development, energy levels, preparedness for the school day. And then we have, going over to the right, language and cognitive development, and that looks at an interest in books, reading, language-related activities, and literacy. Communication skills and general knowledge measures the ability to communicate needs and participate in storytelling. And then these last 2 domains over here, the EDI is actually most heavily weighted in these 2 domains, social competence and emotional maturity. So it breaks those typical social emotional out into 2 distinct categories. So emotional maturity measures behaviors in less formalized environments that are focused on helping, tolerating, and demonstrating empathy. And then that social competence domain really looks at behavior in that more structured classroom environment. So that looks at cooperation, respect for others, and socially responsible behavior. The EDI does not report on individual children. There are lots of other tools and assessments that do that. It won't identify specific learning disabilities. It does not recommend special education or being held back. It doesn't really inform teaching approaches or instructions at an individual teacher level, and it doesn't reflect performance of school or quality of teaching. And that's because the EDI looks at where children live in the context of their communities. It's broken out by census tracts, which don't really overlay with school boundaries. So we're really looking at where children live versus where they go to school and that individualized school experience. So we use this slide to really ground us in the EDI and at Erikson Institute and in policy and leadership. So this is Bronfman-Brenner's ecological model of development. And it really shows all the influences on a child's development. Thinking about that healthy early childhood development, it's important to children, families, and communities. So we all have to work together to ensure that children's early life experiences have a positive influence on their subsequent life trajectory. So we look at those close influences of family, school, culture, and peers, the community influences, which include community supports and services, the schools and the health systems, and those global national influences, which include the economy, culture and customs, social conditions, and policy. So those are all interacting for a child, and they all interact with each other. You can just think about the current pandemic and how maybe a child didn't have a direct impact on the pandemic didn't influence a child directly, but all the things in their environment were really influenced by it. So we use this data as just the beginning. It really helps us to shine a light into focus. So the real work is coming together once the data is released and communities are able to really understand what it's saying. We give the data and we help the communities collect it, but it's really theirs, and it's theirs to make sense of why is this happening. The community can then make intentional action plans with input based on historical knowledge and gathering that context from the community to understand it. So the researchers are not the experts, really the residents, those who live and work in communities are the experts. And using this data to really, we can look at individuals and go in granular, but data really, the EDI really helps us take a big picture look. It helps us zoom out at the bigger picture.
So the EDI has been and is most importantly a catalyst for action. It's a tool to engage the whole community in the important questions of supporting child development. Foundations for conversations and the beginning talking points all come together as we start interacting with each other. So it's important to bring in multiple stakeholders, for example, families, the mayor's office, Parks and Rec, teachers. Where are those stakeholders that are not always sitting around the table? How can we build a table together to have these very important conversations? And how can we really ensure that voices are being lifted up and recognized in this work? Thinking about coming around and looking at data, but understanding the historical perspective of what's happened in a community and what needs to happen to continue to move forward for better change. Communities have identified themselves as being in a movement around the early development instrument, because this is not just a project or a program, but it's really time to create long-lasting change. And we know that community systems development takes a long time. So it is a movement to come together for greater change for our youngest citizens in our community. So the EDI empowers communities to develop solutions that address children in the context of their neighborhoods. We want to understand the data better. So we have to take it out and ask those that are living the experience, what's going on? And what do you think we should do? And how can we do this together? Some long-range goals that of the early development instruments work in communities would be to identify strength and opportunities for change, promote equitable distribution and alignment of resources, and to foster better coordination across systems. All right. So here's a little overview of the early development instrument in Illinois. When we enter a community, our first question is, how are the children? And this question specifically is not about individual children, but rather about the community as a whole. The Maasai often ask this question. It's a traditional greeting because everyone plays a significant role in the early childhood community and in our community. So you, as the cross-sector leaders representing various corners of the state, let's ask, how are the children in your community? Because we know that if the children are well, then those around them are well. And the environment in which they live is set up for them to thrive. We want to know, how are the children in your community? Here is a quick overview of the state of Illinois, of our partners across Illinois. We have Greater East St. Louis, the Early Learning Partnership, that they've completed 2 different waves of the EDI, which means the EDI is implemented every 3 years. And so they've implemented the tool twice. The Success by 6 Coalition of Kankakee County, they've also implemented it twice. And that includes Bradley, Bourbonnais, Kankakee, and Pembroke Township. The Collaboration for Early Childhood of Oak Park, Central Neighborhoods of Skokie and Morton Grove, as well as Rockford.
So the way we move through this work is through our coaching process. So the foundations behind our coaching process are bulleted up here. We work from an anti-colonial stance. Data that's driven, interpreted, and guided by the community. We don't impose our work and we don't profit from the work, but we stand alongside communities in making their own sense of it. And it's really process-based. It's, again, community systems work. It takes time. And we encourage that there is a process that helps build community, and that's where a lot of the work is. And we're Erikson Institute, so with advances in neuroscience and brain development, we know that experiences and relationships matter in the early years and have lifelong implications. So we hold that true in the way that we partner and work with communities. We're really invested in those relationships, and having those experiences together builds community. And we do a lot of reflective practice. So we have daily check-ins, and we reflect constantly in our own internal process and also with our community partners, and look at what we are bringing into the conversation, and constantly thinking about that and refining it and working alongside people to make sense of it. And the goals of our coaching process, so we have embedded data literacy. So we really believe that data literacy leads to democratized data. So through our approach, communities use that data for decision making. They're speaking the same data language because it's a common and shared data set. So we coach communities on reading and using that data. We take a firm anti-racist approach. We do this through increased root cause analysis. So that's really finding the source of a social barrier or problem. And also through policy making. So the goal being that children are growing up with more equitable opportunities, and there are policies that support and drive that. And we really think about the systems as a whole. So people working across sectors are all together at the table, and we do a lot of inviting them in and making sure that they're there and joining in whole community solutions, and also to contribute to resource distribution and systems alignment.
We receive a lot of the same questions, so we would like to address our frequently asked questions together. Are you ready, Rebecca?
I'm so ready. So I want to know, where do I find this EDI data that you keep talking about?
So we have a website, and it's edi.erikson.edu. And when you go into the website, you can learn more on the project. There's a lot of different articles about the breakdown of each of the different developmental domains. You can enter each of the different communities that have implemented the tool in Illinois. Both Kankakee County as well as Greater East St. Louis has 2 different waves of data. There is a space if you are from each of the areas to enter your address and plot point your address onto the maps. And if you have additional questions, we always encourage you to reach out to the partners. This is their data, so you will find on each of the community's spaces a little background on why they implemented the data and what's happening and who to contact for additional information. Rebecca, how is the EDI used in communities and schools?
I'm so glad you asked. Communities use the data to advocate for changes to policies and systems and funding, especially at the local, county, and state levels. So the EDI really contributes to the fundamental need to shift the curve in the direction of better outcomes for all children and to reduce disparities among them. The EDI provides a common language for children's development and comparable data to reflect on and to plan for optimal outcomes for children. So everyone is looking at the same data set, but they're using it and looking at it from their different lenses and all talking about it in the same way. It also,
Erica, I'm going to jump right in there because I think that this is a very interesting point. I've worked with a lot of communities, and we have and what they've often have are pieced together data from different years or different parts of the community. So I think that's what makes this very interesting, as this data set covers the entire community for 1 year, and it is a snapshot of what's happening currently, but it is one data set that we can develop a conversation around.
That's great, thank you. And that's what we've seen communities do, is just all talking about it in the same way, and using that same language. It offers trend data. So for communities that have done more than one wave or one round of data collection, they can look at how their data has changed over time. It can enhance the capacity of stakeholders to make research-based decisions.
Also, Rebecca, the communities have been able to use the results to engage their communities in plans of action to better support their local children and families. So we've seen a lot of the data be embedded to revitalize and re-energize strategic action plans. It's also meant to engage cross-sector partnerships and to shared accountability. So often the finger point, is happening where it goes right back to the school system. And it's not just about schools. We have to think about what's happening prior to school entry, as well as what's happening as children continue to matriculate through the grades. So how are we as a community coming together to be the strong village raising our children?
One of my favorite ways that I've seen the EDI be used is this cross-sector partnerships. Watching people from social services connect with judges and talking about what resources are actually out there in the community that maybe families are being encouraged or mandated to do. So all these different kinds of outcomes and impacts that you can't always measure, but seeing cross-sector collaborators working together for the same goal of improving early childhood ecologies.
And often many don't know what the other is working on. I've heard, a group come to the table and say, we want to create this really great resource list for young children and families. And the collaboration over here said, we have that. Let's talk. How can we better, utilize the resources you have to continue towards the same end goal that we have? So that being said, it's also been used to support future funding proposals. Many have used the data along with the data from the risk and reach to enhance their funding proposals with precise data. Oh, this is a good question. How much time is required for kindergarten teachers? Rebecca, we get this all the time.
So we just put it right up here on the slide. It's a real concrete breakdown of the ask of time. So we expect to be able to talk to the kindergarten teacher about what's coming before the actual assessment time, because we want to tell them about the EDI also, and how it's going to essentially over time make their work easier with the children that are coming into their classroom. So 30 minutes orientation for them to understand what the EDI is. And then the actual implementation of the tool. So schools or administrations have a choice either to offer a substitute to come in for 1 day of release time so that teachers can go and do the EDI, spend that whole day doing it on their classroom, or they can have a stipend and do it on their own time. Typically what we see is that teachers can get a classroom of 25-ish or so done with enough time for the school day. And then we ask, optional for the teachers whether or not they want to attend, but we want to bring the data back to those teachers first. We want to hear what they have to say about the data they collected, really. Jacqueline, you've got a story about this.
Well, I'm a former early childhood educator. I had a revolving door of data takers. People came and took the data and they never came back and asked me, why is this happening? What's happening with your children? Making decisions coldly on data without understanding what was happening was really frustrating for me as an educator. And so now in bringing this tool out and collecting this data, there's a couple things. It's really important that we ask those that are working with the children what's happening and inviting you to the table to help us develop solutions for the community. I also wanted to point out that in the planning of prior to implementation of the tool, we always want to ensure that there is a union representative at the table so that we can best accommodate whatever is happening as far as timing to ensure that this is really not extended too long, that we are offering the best support possible. And, in implementing this tool, ultimately, the community is saying we want to help and ensure that our children are coming into school stronger and ready to learn. So how can we help so that children, when they enter your classroom, are ready for you, as well as how is the school ready for our children. I think that's equally important. Let's see, our next question.
So I would say we get this a lot too. So if I'm a brand new community and I've just heard about the EDI and we want to engage, what would our first year timeline look like?
Well, I think it's interesting. I always want to encourage time for planning. So that spring or summer prior to the implementation of the EDI, that's when we do some contract negotiation, mainly around data sharing and privacy for children's data. Engaging not just the major public entity but also engaging with your private schools and parochial schools, because this is a pulse check on all kindergarten children in the area. We want to ensure that we're bringing all of the entities that have kindergarten children around the table so that we can have that view of what's happening across the entire community. So that takes some time. I also think it's time to plan. You need that early time to plan and bring and identify who are going to be leading this work, the logistics of the timing throughout the year, bringing the union representative to the table so that we can have those really important, crucial conversations. The fall is when we really begin kicking off those community workshops. We want to bring in not the typical choir sitting around the table, but who are those that need to be having the conversations and coming to the table? Do we want to bring in Parks and Rec and the mayor's office, and as well as thinking about where are our families? Where's family voice? And are we hosting our workshops in the daytime, or are we hosting them after school hours so that teachers can attend? A lot of this is part of the planning portion in the spring and summer, and then these community workshops are kicking off in the fall. We have champion trainings. We call those that are leading the initiative in the work in the community the champions. So we have a champions training, and we do orientations for communities, teachers, and others. Think of board members, or even just those stakeholders coming around the table to implement these workshops.
And let's point out, if I can take 1 second, just point out,
Sure.
So you call these workshops, you don't call them meetings.
No, roll up your sleeves. We're all working, we're connecting with each other, we're learning about each other's work. We need to know how we can interwork with each other across the community and create stronger ties to each other. Winter, continued workshops. This is when we also have our teacher training and EDI implementation, and we do some additional data gathering. As you can see on our website, it's not just the EDI data, but we also have local data and census data, and this is identified by each community, and it varies from community to community. So while one community would say it's really important to look at food deserts layered onto our community maps, another community would say, you know what, that may be important, but I want to understand where all of our early childhood centers are located. So we go through a process as a group to identify what are your what you would like to see as far as assets and an overlay, as well as local data sets and census data sets. And we do have there's a lot of data, and I think a lot of people want to put all the data on the maps, but we help work through a process so we identify really what aligns with the current strategic actions and action planning that you're doing together, so that we can really focus efforts and focus in on specific data sets that we are going to move from the data portion into actionable pieces, and then eventually to policy. And then we continue to have springs to prepare for the data release. In the spring, we continue to have workshops to prepare for the data release that happens usually in May and June. And we begin preparing ambassadors. Your ambassadors are going to go out in the summer to then bring the data out across the community and learn about the data, contextualizing the data, really understanding what we're seeing in the maps. And that's typically your first year timeline.
So how is the community engaged in this? I heard you call it a movement. And how is that done?
So we have those that are coming around these workshops. You have families and different stakeholders sitting across the table, building systems, having conversations, learning about data, driving the work. But there's also space for our grass tops, those influential leaders across the community, thinking of like the superintendent and the mayor, bringing them together in, these policy roundtables to then think about what's happening at the grassroots movement, moving that data to action, and then really connecting it with those policymakers in the community. We do that through a couple different ways. There's policy roundtable spaces in some of our communities that they've built out. Additionally, many of these influential leaders have been invited to participate in our Early Childhood Leadership Academy, where they're learning about the importance of brain development and early childhood, and really those first 1,100 days of life and the importance, and then being charged to go back to their community and really help what's currently taking place and elevating it so that the community is engaged in these long-term movements for greater change. And we often think back to that first question. Rebecca, how are the children? What's the response?
And the children are well when. Communities lead in interpreting their own data and developing solutions. The wisdom is already in the room. Cross-sector, so those unusual stakeholders come together and contribute to developing and implementing those solutions. And precise data-driven, tailored interventions inform how resources are distributed and aligned together. So
at Erikson, we propose that the tool can be powerful and transformative for communities by advancing the following lessons learned, ensuring that all of these are coming to fruition in our communities. This is the community's data. They will lead in interpreting it. As Rebecca had said, this is not Erikson's data, but we are there as supportive coaches. And as the communities find the need, we will continue to support our partners in truly moving the data all the way through to policy. All right, catch our latest updates with our app. And we want to say thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, this concludes our EDI informational session. Here's our contact information, and you can find more on our website. Thank you.